Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
We're back again after another glorious summer weekend, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, you couldn't beat the weather in Wisconsin this weekend.
It was nice.
And I know, guys, that we tend to talk about the weather a lot, but when you only have like 3 months of beautiful weather or perfect, and the thing is, it was perfect this weekend. So
yeah. And we'll try not to complain when it does get nasty.
Yes.
But we can't help but enjoy when it's awesome like it was this weekend.
It's just too awesome. And there's so many festivals going on in Wisconsin in the summertime. Wendy and I performed at one on Saturday night.
Yes.
And then we are performing at a huge one this Saturday. That's August 4th. We're going to be at the Wisconsin State Fair.
The greatest state fair in our state.
Yeah, I completely agree that it is the finest state fair in Wisconsin. Anyway, Sunspot will be doing live full electric set at the Sprecher stage.
Yes, the Sprecher Landing, our favorite place to play at the state fair. So much fun.
So if you guys think that Sprecher is famous just for root beer, you are wrong. They got plenty of real beer, and we'll be drinking all of it on Saturday. Anyway, so come down August 4th. We're going to be there. It's going to be all afternoon at the Sprecher Landing at Wisconsin State Fair. So we wanted to bring that up right away to let you guys know, because we know we have a bunch of people in Wisconsin, and people from all over the state come to the state fair.
And if you're not from Wisconsin, well, hopefully one of these years we'll make it to your state for your state fair.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Because that would be fun.
We'll be the ones opening for REO Speedwagon.
Hey, Alice Cooper's playing at the Wisconsin State Fair the night before us. That's pretty sweet.
Awesome. Alice Cooper is doing his paranormal tour, and that's running through. And I think we talked about this in one of our Patreon hangouts, but we didn't get a chance to actually talk about it on the show yet. But when Alice Cooper came to Madison, I wrote up an entire article because he was talking about his paranormal album.
I remember that.
Yeah, and he was talking about how he had a haunted experience of his own in the early 1980s. Like, him and Joe Perry were working together on a record, and they were both like drying out at this house in upstate New York. Because Alice Cooper, he never went to AA or anything like that, but he decided that he just stopped drinking one day after like 12 years of drinking like a case of beer at every show.
Just had enough.
And he said, he's like, oh yeah, he said it was affecting his performance and stuff, so he stopped drinking. And Joe Perry obviously struggled with heroin addiction and all these kind of things for a while. And
man.
so they both went to this house in upstate New York and working on writing songs together. And they had a lot of weird paranormal experiences.
That's cool. And they were sober, so there's a little bit more validity to the reports, right?
Yeah, but they were like weird sounds coming from the basement. Like, they ran out of the house one night because like the doors kept opening and weird stuff kept happening. He actually talks about it on like the Celebrity Paranormal Stories. Alice Cooper does.
And you got to hear it firsthand from him.
But the thing is, all of these stories, though, the latest retelling, he says that the rumor was it was the place where Jay Anson wrote the Amityville Horror.
That's intriguing.
Not
true.
No.
Myth bust.
Yeah, no, I ended up finding a People article from 1979 or whatever, like right after the movie came out, and Jay Anson was talking about when he was writing it, and he was writing part of it at his sister's house in a different part of New York, and then part of it at his office in Manhattan and things like that. So when Rolling Stone says that Alice Cooper wrote a song in the house that Amityville Horror was written, it's not true.
Wrong-o.
So I hate to bust myths on things like that.
Well, fact-checking is important here.
Well, and the thing is, it doesn't make it any different that Alice Cooper and Joe Perry had a paranormal experience.
Right, exactly.
Like, it doesn't change the fact that they saw something and heard something
cool.
that blew their minds and scared them. It's just that whole thing of, I think haunted history is more fun when you can connect it to something that really happened.
Yeah, I agree.
But, that's some of the stuff we talk about with Mike Damante. I'm glad we're talking about music a little bit. It's not, Alice Cooper is not punk rock. He's more hard rock. But the thing is, we talk about the importance of paying attention to people's experiences in this discussion with Mike Damante. And we talking about his new book, Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. And we get into a little bit of the punk rock ethos and the do-it-yourself kind of thing and how that relates to his study of the paranormal. So, why don't we just jump right in? Mike Damante, last time we talked to you, you had just released punk rock and UFOs, two things that I love, and I'm glad that other people out there love them too. So what was the reaction to punk rock and UFOs? It's been, like a year and a half since we last talked to you about it. How have things been going for you?
Well, first, I just want to thank you, first of all, for having me on the show again. You're one of I believe, the first podcasts that I was on once I started doing the podcast radio circuit to promote the book. The reception was good. I was really surprised that people liked it. Sometimes you write something and you're confident in your abilities as a writer, but you don't know people aren't necessarily going to like it. So people liked it. They enjoyed it. They liked the interesting take I had on it. And since then, like I said, I've been on other podcasts and TV programs and radio, especially when the Pentagon UFO stuff hit. Here I was on Fox 26 in Houston, locally.
Oh, nice.
And Spectrum News Austin had me on for 2 short segments about UFOs. So that was cool. So I was able to get some FaceTime on TV in Texas. So that was cool.
Well, I mean, and Austin's a fun place. Houston's a fun place. Texas is a big place. So if you're going to get some FaceTime, that's a great place to get it. And the thing is, one thing I'm thinking about, punk rock and UFOs, when the Blink 182 thing hit, last December, when, all the Tom DeLonge stuff and he announced the To the Stars Academy and everything, I would think that that when people do a search for punk rock and UFOs, you're like, yes, like this, I have arrived. What was your reaction to that? And for those of you guys who haven't been paying attention to this particular bit of news, so the pop punk band Blink 182, the lead singer Tom DeLonge, I don't know if I always say it right.
Yeah, DeLonge.
He came out and he said that he's got secret contacts in the Pentagon and things like that. We've discussed it on the show a bunch of times. But what was your take on the whole thing, Mike, as someone I know who is an admirer of the punk rock ethos, as well as somebody who's out there doing investigations as well?
So I think the Academy has credibility in terms of who's on the board. He was able to really secure some people with just years of experience in different fields, whether it's from government, science, etc. So I definitely think the Academy at the start had credibility. I think it was pivotal that it became a story. It was covered by the mainstream, especially the Pentagon UFO story. It wasn't so much, it was the To the Stars Academy. It was the stuff that came after that. And then kind of the Academy, and Tom especially, kind of took a lower profile. And Luis Elizondo started doing all the media rounds. If you notice, Tom DeLonge has actually been kind of in the back seat after he announced. He did all the hype to it, and then once it was actually announced, he kind of took the back seat for a while. And I think there's some parts of it, of the business model, that are kind of problematic, but the fact that, we're getting these videos out and people are talking about it, that's a good first step. And just kind of see where it goes from there. If anything, if it leads to more people talking about this, great. It's not going to be full disclosure, which I don't think is ever going to happen.
Right. That the whole idea. I mean, the whole idea that the government's going to come out and be like, "Hey, you know what? We've been lying to you for decades now, and the UFOs are here. They're awesome. That's with our stealth bomber technology. Blah. We're already bombing places in Afghanistan with the alien technology. Thanks for the money."
Yeah.
I just can't see that happening in our lifetime or ever. So, but do you think when we think about Tom DeLonge working with all these ex-Department of Defense guys and stuff like that, that almost seems like, the inmates running the asylum?
Yeah, I think it sounds crazy just on the surface of, a traditional, just traditional ufologists would think, but Tom's been researching this stuff for years. He was always vocal about it. He just really didn't become a passion, I guess, until he decided to, take it and then start this company with it. It's weird because people think, well, why would they trust a rock star? Or, they could be using him. And that could very well be true. He could just be kind of a puppet or being managed or controlled. We don't know that. But also the fact that I think he knows his stuff definitely helped him have credibility in the eyes of some of those people. He
is a guy who is well versed in the UFO field, and I mean, with the classical, government cover-up and things like he's right in there with that 90s X-Files UFO knowledge and feel. It's fun. And I think if they were going to use a rock star to change our minds about things, they'd have picked the guy from Bad Religion. Or they'd have picked Henry Rollins. They'd have picked somebody, you wouldn't pick the guy from Blank 182. You'd pick somebody with like untouchable punk credibility. It would be when Jello Biafra comes out as a stool pigeon or as an operative of the CIA. That's when I know they've gotten to everybody. So I was always just what other people's take on the To the Stars Academy thing. I mean, I know a lot of people who are very skeptical about it. I know a lot of people who are really excited about it. And I just thought this might be right up your alley, it's that mixture specifically of UFOs and kind of punk rock.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny you mentioned Greg Graffin earlier from Bad Religion, who I've interviewed before. And I think last time I interviewed him, I asked him about, kind of what he thinks about, life out there. And I wouldn't say he's a skeptic, but he's not necessarily a firm believer either. He kind of falls right in the middle where, where it's a possibility, but then again, he's also not like, yes, UFOs are real.
I'd expect that from a guy who, whose T-shirts have a cross with a, with the nose symbol through them, that he's going to be pretty skeptical kind of character.
Yeah, I mean, also he comes from the world of academia too, not just punk rock. He's a PhD professor as well. And also like with the, why would they trust Tom DeLonge, he also has something that those bands don't have, which isn't a knock towards them. He has a little celebrity factor to him. The fact that some of these people, like their kids probably knew who Blink-182 was. Like, what I mean? I think that probably helped get his foot in the door as well, just because even though Blink, was, a pop punk band, they were still a big band. They were still one of the largest bands in the world at some point. So, I think most people at least heard the name of the band. So I think that really helped get his, his foot in the door with that crowd. And I was trying to get him for the book too, trying to get a quote from him for the book, because I've interviewed him before in the past about music and Blink and Angels and Airwaves, and I've talked to his publicist, and it's just really hard because he's not even giving quotes to the Washington Post right now. It just seems like everything's being very controlled and managed, and Luis Elizondo is the one who's doing all the media right now regarding the To the Stars. Tom's kind of on the back burner working on music and some other stuff. So I think they're being very controlled with who he talks to and what he says.
And that seems reasonable because, the guy from Blink-182 might have loose lips or might say some crazy things and torpedo the whole endeavor. And especially right now, this is the kind of time where your media presence, your social media presence, everything from your tweets to your statements to everything on down is being very it's analyzed very closely, and there's all sorts of people who will respond to it, and you got to keep that PR really in check. So it's probably a smart move, and Luis Elizondo does have the kind of the credibility, the research, the background. I mean, he's part of that big project, and so that's true. So that's just an interesting thing. It's the Conduit was a rock star, and yes, and Blink-182 can fill stadiums. They're not going to be playing on just a club tour or whatever. Like if they all got back together with the original guys or whatever, they could come in and they could fill a 30,000 seat place without a problem.
Yeah.
And so I can see it's just very interesting how it turned out. But that's just part of the punk rock and UFOs world. And so your first book, Cryptozoology Meets Anarchy, which title I love, and the idea of using some of that same ethos of punk rock into the exploration of the unknown. And now your new book's coming out, Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. What was the inspiration behind the title there?
Okay, so the title comes from a punk rock song by a band called the Bouncing Souls. And the song's called True Believers. And that song has nothing to do with UFOs or anything like that.
Sure.
I just thought, the title of the first book was so catchy. And I think you need something that's going to pull people in and have people talking or questioning, what is this about? And when I was writing the second one, I had a few working titles, but True Believers was definitely the one I went with, just because it fit the ethos of the book. The book's kind of about it's a call to arms, right? It's almost like a persuasive argument about why people should be interested in the stuff in the first place. And it looks at the people who research the stuff. It looks into them about their background, how they got into this. any commonalities that they could draw with the common person who may not believe in this or who's semi-interested in it. So I wanted to pull in all these ideas of our belief system, which I kind of touched on in the first book about our process of belief, what we choose to believe, what we choose to, the beliefs we choose to rebel against. So I kind of took that idea and expanded on it in this one. So the title True Believers just fit. It's perfect, especially with the aesthetic of the book as well. This kind of this persuasive call to arms to people who ever read the book, just to kind of get interested in this stuff or just want to know, just want to know more in general, not just necessarily about cryptozoology or UFOology, but, there's stuff out there that people want to learn. Go do it. Ignorance isn't bliss.
Well, that's for sure. And now you've been active in blogging about this stuff, researching, and of course you're a journalist and getting into it. Now, was there some kind of switch that happened in your life or something that flipped when you kind of moved from mainstream journalism to now I'm going to be writing about things on the fringe? Like, has anything changed in your perspective in your writing? Has anything changed about the way people treat your mainstream journalism? Or have those things coexisted peacefully?
That's a really good question. So I look at it as two ways. There was a switch I made in terms of my professional life, because I worked, full time at a large newspaper, the Houston Chronicle, and I made that switch to education to start teaching, but I still did my writing on the side as well. And then there was also the switch in terms of what I chose to write about more often, or my interest in it, and that goes back to the first time I ever saw something in the sky. The first sighting I ever personally had. And I thought about that, and I looked at a lot of the people who are researchers or experiencers. There's that commonality. There's a spark. There's something in these people that sets them off that says, you know what, I want to research this, or I want to write about it. So that's one of the things I cover in the new book, too. I take a few people in their instances and just kind of interview them about that and ask, what got you involved in this? And it all started with a spark, whether it was a sighting of something or an experience they had, whether it was someone who's an experiencer or somebody who witnessed something in the sky. So as far as how it's viewed in terms of mainstream journalism, I write, even though I started the website punkrockingufos.com after the book, I still treat it like it's real journalism. I hate the title blog, but it is a blog. It is, and I've kind of gone past the traditional journalism, where blog's a dirty word. It's not anymore. So I started doing the website and the blog, and I write it just like I would a news story. It's structured almost. I want it to look almost like a news site. I'll have interviews on there, I'll have reviews, but I make sure things that are commentary are marked commentary, things that are marked review, and so forth. So those lines don't get blurred. So I approach it the same way, just because it should be approached the same way. Journalism, just journalism.
Well, and I think that's a good point, man, especially because every major newspaper has blogs within it. Every major newspaper is featuring stories on their website. I liken it back to the days of when there used to be different editions of the newspaper. There'd be the morning edition, there'd be the afternoon edition, and stories would be updated to reflect changes throughout the day. And it seems that now, we're on an online blog structure in a lot of ways. Things are more like how they were back 100 years ago when newspapers were updated several times in a day versus, I think when I was a kid, you had one newspaper showed up at, in the morning. And that was it. And maybe there would be a late edition of the Milwaukee Journal sometimes, but normally there was just one edition of a newspaper every day, or we had two major papers in Milwaukee. And, that idea that stories are constantly updating, the news is changing. And while the 24-hour news cycle in a lot of ways is scary, and sometimes it's horrible the way it can replay a tragedy for ratings over and over and over again, or it can focus on things, if it bleeds, it leads, and then alter the conversation away from stuff that might be more important. At the same time, what blogs can do is they can offer also the commentary. People can talk. You could have you have your letter to the editor right 5 minutes after you release your story.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's a great way to kind of liken it in terms of we live in a digital age, and, back in the day it was just editions. And even when I worked for the newspaper, I worked in the sports section, Eastern Chronicle, we would have different editions. And, I would always explain it this way, in sports, think about it. So we live in Central time zone, right? Mm-hmm. myself and you in Milwaukee. Think about it though. The LA Lakers are playing out west, different time zone. You still try to get those scores in those games in. So if the Milwaukee Bucks are playing the Lakers in LA, that may not make your first edition, your first deadline. So it'll make the second edition. So, but nowadays, like you said, with everything going more digital, it's almost like having that edition updated in live time.
Yeah, and I think it's great. The only thing is, I wish more blogs had copy editors. That's the one thing that we need to bring the digital age into maturity is when they can start affording copy editors. But okay, so as you decided to write a new book, as you decided to bring it on the call to arms, why people should be interested in this, what was your first move when you're thinking, okay, you just released a book, you get out there, you start making now you start getting involved, like you said, the podcast, the radio circuit, you're doing interviews, and you're interviewing and talking to more people who have had experiences. Did you start broadening out from cryptozoology and ufology? Did you start talking to people who have maybe had haunting experiences, poltergeists, or Bigfoot sightings? Or, was there something in particular as you were working on a new book, new branches that you went out to investigate of weird stuff? I
think it all kind of goes together. The unexplained is the unexplained. And I in this book, I kind of try to link them together somehow. We obviously talk about UFOs first and cryptozoology second, but there's still... there's still a link between those, the idea of the unexplained. And in terms of what I did differently this time, I just went in with a different, I wanted to, because the first book was basically just me. It was me, my experiences, my opinions. I wanted to get not just my thoughts and takes, but I wanted to get other people's experiences and their interactions and what got them into this. And I wanted to get quotes because a good news story has quotes. So even though I'm writing a book that's persuasive in some senses, there also has to be some things to back it up, not just out of my mouth. So that's why I want to talk to a lot of different people. One of the first big interview I did for punkrockufos.com, the website, was Erin Ryder from Destination Truth. And she's quoted in the book too. And to this day, that story still is my highest click story. Like every month, people still read it, which is mind blowing to me because it was so long ago. We did that story, and she had a really good point about cryptozoology. I was asking, about going on these, on these expeditions and how the tapings work and how people, you watch these shows and they're entertaining, but they never really, you get this little tease like, oh, do we see something? Do we not? And the episodes are so similar. And, she had a really good explanation for that. Just because, think about it, they're there for usually 2 or 3 days, right? What is the chance at the time that they're there with a camera crew that they're going to be able to catch, Bigfoot on camera or something?
Right, that'd be a miracle.
It's a miracle. It's very rare.
It's literally a miracle.
Yeah. Not only that, there's things that people don't factor, like budget, right? The budget of the show, travel. A lot of times they're in dangerous conditions, not just geographically, but politically. They're in places that necessarily aren't friendly to tourists.
Sure.
So they're putting themselves in dangerous situations for a very, very small window. So you're not always going to get the XYZ results. You're not going to get these data-driven results from these shows, but they're still out there trying to find it. So I thought that was really fascinating too, to include that in there. That just because something unexplained isn't always explained, it doesn't mean that it's not still out there.
Sure. Now, as you said, as you talk to different people and as you're branching out into these different things and the different parts of the unexplained, I find with this show, talking to different people, that my mind is broadened with things that before I would have been like, no way, or you're crazy, or I find myself open to at least possibilities that I hadn't thought of before. Was there any particular case or discussion or things like that, like, for example, we just did an interview with Joshua Cutchin where he talks about paranormal child abduction, his new book, Thieves in the Night. And he's really into fairy lore. And to me, the idea of fairies, I'm like, give me a break. But with the conversation and realizing that it's connected to the way people talk about aliens today, connected to the way people talk about poltergeists and legends and all these kind of things, you're like, oh, there's something to it, or at least the history and something is much more interesting than what I thought of as, Tinkerbell and fairy godmothers and stuff like that. And so my mind was open to something new. When you were working on it, what kind of new things was your mind open to?
I'm trying to think specifically. So I was doing a lot of reading too. I did a lot more research, reading a lot of different, just branching out more. One of the things I was reading the other day, I'm reading it right now. This is really interesting to me. This isn't something that I necessarily dismissed, but it really kind of connected a lot of things for me. Basically, I'm reading a book called Mutants and Mystics by a guy named Jeffrey Kripal. He's a professor of religious studies at Rice University in Houston. And I interviewed him for my book as well. One of the things I'm reading about in his book is he's talking about kind of mythology, science fiction, religion. And one of the authors he's quoting basically says everything that's been reported, all these unexplained creatures, mythology, folklore, it all ties together, but we're seeing it in different ways. So, for example, the idea of a child being abducted in the night by a fairy, right? And you could tie that into ufology, but the story throughout time changes, right? For what folklore may say is a fairy could have been an angel in other people's eyes, or an alien abduction in someone else's eyes. So people are having these same experiences throughout time. They're just recorded differently. And I thought that was really fascinating. That's a good way to kind of tie everything together in terms of the unexplained.
And I think that's a great way too. And I read your blog post in the interview with him, and we'll link to that in the show notes so you guys can check it out at the punkrockandufos.com blog. It's a very worthwhile read. And I've been going down the same kind of path a little bit as I'm talking to more and more people, and they're talking about these things they're experiencing, and then you find like you said, tying together the different parts of the experience are the same, and you realize, okay, well, people are seeing something and they're interpreting it in a way that they believe or they can understand. And some people might believe in Bigfoot, or they can believe in a cryptid. They can believe in a giant ape. They can believe in seeing the missing link. To them, that seems real. That's reasonable. Yeah, of course there could be creatures that we don't know exist yet. Or other people who believe in ghosts. They see a ghost because that's something they believe in. Or, like you said, aliens versus fairies. To me, it seems completely reasonable that beings from other planets are visiting us and abducting us. Like, yeah, it seems reasonable. Whereas 1,000 years ago, they'd be like, what's another planet? But I do think that these strange elementals are coming in the middle of the night and doing strange, weird things from the forest. So I thought that interview was really, really great. And the way that it connected, I think more and more people in the field are looking away from almost trying to categorize everything or physically explain everything, and just realize that a lot of experience comes down to the experiencer and how they interpret it. Am I on the right track here, or?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, I agree with you 100%. And I think that a lot of people are starting to kind of look at other, like you said, other ways to kind of tie everything together, because there's so many loose ends. One of the things that when I was interviewing him, Professor Kripal said is that these occurrences are more common than people think. And it's true. I was one of the books I'm reading right now is David Hatcher Childress has a book coming out called Bigfoot Nation. And the book is basically just, it comes out in September. I got an advance where I'm almost done with it. It's basically every documented sighting in North America for Bigfoot ever. And it's very comprehensive. And it's thousands of reported sightings. So do you mean to tell me that thousands of people have been lying all these years? They're seeing something. They're having some similar experience. Okay? They're seeing something that they believe is something they've never seen before. So it's fascinating to me that there's thousands of recorded sightings of this creature, but just because you don't have any physical evidence, does it disqualify from being real? And I think we have to open up our eyes to say, kind of go against conventional science in that sense, and be like, if so many people see and believe, that makes it real. God is real to a lot of people. Now, do people have that physical proof of a God that they could, hand it to you or show them in their hands? No, they can't. But to them, it's real. So why can't something like Bigfoot be real to somebody?
Well, and that's exactly right, because when you talk to somebody about their religion, like you wouldn't make fun of somebody's religion the way you make fun of somebody believing in Bigfoot.
Exactly. That's a great point.
I'm not a church going kind of guy or anything like that, but I do appreciate people's spiritual side. But I grew up Catholic, and if I said to somebody, if you talk about the Catholic Church, and you talk about how that the idea of wine turning into blood physically, it really becomes Jesus' blood, not just a symbol. It actually is supposed to become Jesus' blood. Okay, you say something like that, and you're like, well, that's crazy. But then no one would ever call you crazy for going to church and doing that. Meanwhile, if we all sat in a circle, held hands, sang "Kumbaya," "Come here, Bigfoot, come to us," people, people be like, "What are these guys doing?" So I wonder if that's related to when you talk about the call to arms of punk rock and UFOs, true believers. What is that? Why should we be interested in this kind of stuff?
First of all, I just want to say that's a really great point you made in terms of what people mock and what people choose not to mock.
Right. Well, people make fun of Scientology all the time, but is Scientology any different than any of the stuff that I grew up with? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's in every religious text and every religion, there's crazy stories, things that aren't things that we would think possible. That maybe they happen. But
right.
We don't know. But who's to say, like you said, who's to say a UFO in the sky? You're going to get made fun of for it. But yeah, back to your question.
The call to arms. When you talk about punk rock and UFOs, true believers, why should we be interested in this thing? I mean, this is something that people ask me all the time, and I need a good answer for it too. So why should we be interested in this?
So we have a challenge right now. The challenge is we have so many things that keep us distracted from this stuff, right? Because it's not a priority. The unexplained, the answers to the universe, they're not a priority to mainstream people. They're not. People, are worried about, their health, their families. Depending on where you live, you're worried about what's happening around you.
Sure.
I mean, every day things are changing in the world and universe. I know this is going to air a couple of weeks, but today, when we're taping it, they have the big summit in Helsinki, Finland today, which has a lot of ramifications.
Absolutely.
So people have things that they're legit worried about and concerned about, and at no point has UFOs or cryptozoology or the unexplained or the secrets of the universe a priority for the mainstream people. And the argument in punk rock and UFOs is these people need to care, a little bit. Just to say, what, let me at least entertain this idea rather shutting it down. I'm not saying go to the, drop, what you're doing, drop all your interests, don't worry about your family.
Right. Leave the protest and let's go on a ghost hunt.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm just saying, these people need to open their mind and have that willingness to care or to at least question things or to at least want to know the answers to things. That's the whole thing. Want to know the answer. Don't just be kind of satisfied with the status quo of where basically everything that you and I believe and read about is fringe. It shouldn't be fringe. It should be openly debated.
Well, and I think that's a great point too. The idea that you should want to know the answers to things because there's too much of life that's easily accepted. There's too much of like here's the way your life's going to be. You're going to get a job, and you're going to then you're going to marry somebody they're probably going to have a job too, and then you're going to send your kids to school, and then go through the entire kind of circle, this wheel that we've developed as a society without questioning why. And I think a lot of this, when we're looking into deeper questions and weird things that happen, and people have experiences that are so far outside the norm of life that it changes their lives in a lot of ways. People see a UFO and their life changes. Starting to question authority, starting to question things out there. I think that's a very powerful argument that this is just a microcosm of a larger ethos of questioning what you're told.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to say it. I mean, just imagine, like I'm thinking right now, imagine having the secrets of the world and the universe kind of sprinkled throughout Earth and throughout, through history books, religion, mythology, studies, just everything sprinkled out there, and not wanting to at least try to be interested in it, unless it was force-fed to you. Like you go to school, you get your history books. It's what what you read in your history books is what's chosen in there.
And history is always written by the winner.
Yeah.
They might have an agenda.
And history is always changing. It's always changing. It's always evolving, just like science. And that's kind of a point I make in the book as well. So, you can't say, well, just because this happened doesn't mean that this didn't happen. So I think it's really important that, the world is vast. It's a vast place, and so is the universe. And we have all these answers out there, seemingly. out there, and we just choose to kind of ignore it. And like I said, I know people are busy. Like I don't have all the time in the world to. I wish I did to read more about this. I try to read as much about it as possible. And there's some researchers who dedicate so much time. And it's the point I make in the book. A lot of these people aren't doing this for money. They have jobs. They have families. They're putting their own free time into research or reading about this stuff. And what makes them different from the average person, the mainstream person who isn't really inclined to ask these questions or investigate these things.
Well, and they can start off by checking out your new book, Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. It's a good way to start questioning things. And it's a good way to start looking into the mysteries of the universe from also a reasonable perspective and also treated like a journalistic perspective. So when we get into it, when you were interviewing people and working on the book, was there anything what would you feel was the most surprising or mind-changing interview or chapter for you as you were working on it, where as you were developing it, was there anything where either you believed or you felt a certain way at the beginning of the writing process, and then you finished the writing process finding yourself thinking a whole new way about something?
I wouldn't say that something specifically changed the I guess projection of the book or my way of thinking. I just learned a lot more about people that I've, kind of befriended, in the community. I learned a lot more about their personal experiences. You can read, on someone's bio, but when you actually talk to them and you ask these questions that, probe, no pun intended, for kind of deeper responses, when you kind of get that, when you get those responses and those answers, you kind of see more of the commonality that you have in common with that person, or that that person may have with someone else who may not be an experiencer or may not believe in this stuff. One of the interesting stories, I interviewed Shannon LeGros from Into the Fray Radio.
Oh,
and,
sure.
Yeah, and she was saying their experience that got her involved in this, and it sounded horrifying. She saw these black shadow beings as a child, and it was freaky. Just reading about it, and I was kind of taken aback. I'm like, wow, that's not the stereotypical, I saw a UFO or I saw something in the bushes. This was something that was very visceral. It was very close to her, and had a very impactful moment in her life. And so, yeah, that was really fascinating too. And then another thing, it didn't make the book or the website, but I have friends of mine. They play in a local band, a Texas hardcore band. And
what's the name of the Texas hardcore band? We'll put it in the show notes.
There you go. The Lion of Wall Street.
Okay. Oh, I like it already.
Cool name. And I've been friends with these guys for a while. We go watch wrestling together, and I had no idea that they had a paranormal experience, and they told it to me. And when I was transcribing it, I could not publish it. It was that scary. It was something out of a horror movie. It's basically just a tour story. When they were on tour, they found this old house to go in, like they were just bored. And it was just like the stuff they've seen in that house. I was like, you know what? It was too scary for me to include in the book or on the website.
Okay, and I understand if it's too scary, but I'm gonna trigger you for a second here, Mike, because we got to talk about it. Because when people say something like that to me, like I feel a chill, like, oh yeah, like I feel that sympathetic, like too scary. They went into was this in Texas when they were on tour? Were they on tour through the Southwest or?
I forgot. I don't think they were in Texas. They were somewhere in the Southwest. And I just remember the one thing I remember vividly is they were in the house and they saw something go by one of the other rooms. And it was basically what they described it as was a person basically on all fours, bent over backwards, crawling.
Oh, they saw like a Lovecraftian horror in.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, there was some other other creepy stuff in there too. But just like when I was typing it in, when I was typing the story in, like I could picture it in my head. And it was just really freaky. And I was like, yeah, you know what? This is creeping me out. And I grew up watching horror movies and, all that stuff as well. But this is something that they really witnessed. And, I believe them. They have no reason to lie. They're all straight edge. So they weren't.
I'm sure they weren't drinking or partying or anything like that.
Yeah. There was nothing. There was no chemicals that were altering their sights. So that was something, in the process, like I said, of writing the book that really interests me.
Well, what's cool about that too, though, is that, and I find as other people discover that you're into this kind of thing and that you're willing to talk to them about it and at least entertain their story, you find that people you would not think who would have an experience or who seem very grounded can often come out of nowhere and be like, I lived in a haunted house. And it's just like, what? People you don't expect. And so, when you're asking around for stories like this and you find your straight edge friends in a band are bored, they check out an abandoned house and see a creature, a human-like creature bent over backwards on all fours, crawling around in some kind of strange crab walk. That's gonna freak you out. But that also is exciting in a way, because it's people you didn't expect having an experience, and that gives the whole thing more credibility.
Yeah, for sure. Like some of the research I'm doing, some of the books I'm reading, and some of the people I've talked to, they're everyday people. They're doctors. They're people who are religious. It's everybody. It's not just people like us. The quote unquote weirdos. It's not us. It's everyone. It's funny, like Donna Lee is somebody I wrote about too. Her abduction case was pretty popular. She was on, I think in the 90s, her and her husband were on a lot of mainstream TV shows about it. And I had no idea that she lived down the street from me, and she was friends with my mom. I had no idea.
Awesome.
Yeah, until after I wrote the first book and I interviewed her. And it's gotten to the point though that I was going to do a follow-up interview, and her husband didn't want to do it because he just started a new job, and he was he's trying to keep a low profile, because when people research him, all these old interviews come up, and he doesn't want people to judge him from his abduction experiences, which is kind of a shame, at this point. I feel for him. I don't care that he didn't want to talk to me. That's fine, but it's just, he shouldn't have to do that. He shouldn't have to hide his past, which is all out there on Google. Right. All his interviews, just be ridiculed by a potential employer.
Well, if you were mugged or something like that, and they interviewed you on the news. Yeah. People would see that and they'd be like, "Oh no, he got mugged. That's horrible." Like that would give you sympathy. But it seems like you undergo some kind of experience which could be horrifying, like what happened to your friends, or a lot of the abduction experiences are completely horrifying. And instead of being a subject of sympathy, you end up being a subject of ridicule.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. You're right. These people who you would think people would sympathize for, it's the exact opposite.
Right, because you can't be telling the truth. It must be, so you're just looking for attention, or you're just looking to make a buck, or all these kind of things. And you realize that a lot of people who experience these things, they have no interest in making $1 from their story. They just want somebody to believe them.
Exactly. And if you go back in time, before the ages of the internet, right, so these people were having these same experiences with no ways to share these experiences with each other. Somebody in India was having the same experience as somebody in Indiana. Right, but we didn't have the mass communication technology then. Even writing letters. What would you do? Write a letter to some random person and say, "Hey, this happened. Let's make up this chain story and see if it spreads." No, people have been having these similar experiences all around the world, not being connected at all for years.
It's certainly an amazing thing, and I'm glad that people like you are coming in there and they're collecting it in a book so we can all share it. We can all understand a lot of these things better. So you cover ufology, you cover some cryptozoology, you cover alien abduction. What's some of the other stuff that's covered in the book? Like who are some of the other people that you interview, and some of the other stories you tell? So
I kind of wanted to pull in people from not just ufology. I want to pull in people from pop culture as well. And one of the things, one of the chapters I'm talking about is mythology and religion, and how kind of all these stories kind of tie together. It's not just the ancient astronaut theory, but it's just kind of a little bit how everything sort of, you kind of talk about blurring the lines too with fiction, science fiction, mythology. And one of the things I played off of was this idea that we see in comic books and pop culture about, alternative universes and the idea of gods on Earth, I'm a big comic book guy, and in Batman vs Superman, Zack Snyder kind of explores this idea of what it would be like in a real world setting if an alien came down, how we would react to him, and we wouldn't react with open arms. We'd be a little bit weary, which Batman is.
Right. I think a lot more people would be like Lex Luthor than they would be like oh, Superman, what a great guy. Superman could look at us and burn holes in our brain.
Yeah, and I think that's the genius that's lost on a lot of people. Like, that movie got destroyed by the critics. But one of the lines in that movie, Lex Luthor goes, to talk about basically these myths, gods amongst men. The stories of our myths, and it's in that movie. It's real. And I talked to David Marquez, who is part of the creative team at Marvel Comics. He's an illustrator, and he's part of the creative team there. And I asked him about, he's somebody outside the box I talked to, not directly involved in ufology and this type of thing, about the idea of other universes and other Earths and dimensions and how that's explored in popular culture. So that's kind of something I pulled from as well. That wasn't just the traditional ufologist or researcher or someone involved in zoology. I try to pull from academia as well as pop culture and ufology.
And when it comes to alternate universes and parallel universes, I feel like comic books have been exploring that for decades, even before it became really popular in, shows like Fringe gets into it, Star Trek and the Mirror Universe and things like that. But I mean, comic books and Marvel itself, right? There's unlimited different parallel universes. Isn't it the Prime 1616 or something? I don't know if I'm getting it right.
But it's funny, like even the other day, like this idea of a multiverse or other universes and dimensions, it's actually a mathematical and physical idea. It's not just a science fiction thing. Like, so just last week I was in Chicago. I was in the Midwest. I was there with my girlfriend and her friends, and her friend's brother was there, and he's going to school he's going for his master's in physics. He wants to be a physicist, and people were asking me about this stuff because they know I write about it.
Sure.
And he looks at me and he goes, absolutely, mathematically. When we're talking about in physics, there's absolutely other universes and dimensions and other beings out there. And I was kind of taken aback by it, just because this is somebody who's in the scientific field, in the academic field, who was just sure based on the mathematical probability alone. And that was really fascinating because, like I said, you don't hear that a lot from people who are involved in mainstream sciences.
Well, and I think about the first time I ever really read about parallel universes outside of Star Trek or whatever, or movies, is A Brief History of Time. And Stephen Hawking goes into the whole, and I was like 12 years old, and I was like reading it, trying to figure out, like, oh, do I want to be a physicist? And I realized I don't have the brain to be a physicist. So I'll be in a band. But you're reading it, and they go into this idea of parallel universes and that every choice might lead to a different universe, and every actions that happen that are so significant that they would split universes in two. And so there's other universes where you went right instead of left, or where you broke up with that girl, or you didn't break up with that girl. And I probably should be in the universe where I did break up with that girl. But that being said, talking to a physicist about it and realizing that the possibility of that existing is very strong, leads to a level of trying to figure out what we're encountering when we encounter the unknown, because we try to put explanations on everything, and it often seems like our ability to explain, even in a way that's fantastical, even in an imagination way, it seems like we're limited by our human experience. And I wonder if in the book and your research, did you encounter more people who were trying to explain things rationally, or people who were just like, you know what, there's just something out there that I don't get, but I know it's real to me?
I think the more people you talk to who's experienced this, they're kind of breaking away from. I wouldn't even say it's irrational. It's not irrational. It's just against what we previously know. These preconceived notions and ideas of what reality is. Which has been kind of this, we've been taught for so long, this is reality. 1 + 1 = 2, right? Well, if you're going to argue that, well, then if a physicist or someone who's studying to be a physicist says, you know what, mathematically it makes sense that there's other universes and other dimensions out there. If they can mathematically map that and get to that answer, right? Why can't you use that same equation in terms of the unexplained, right? Like most people that are involved in this stuff or interested in this stuff, we're open-minded already to these possibilities and ideas. So I really haven't spoken to anyone who's not open-minded to it. Now, there are certain researchers who are very scientific-based, who kind of dismiss a lot of the theories that are out there, and that's fine. I think you need to have as many voices in general. But yeah, that's just another argument that somebody has to make. And I'm not saying that those people are closed-minded, because they're at least trying to find the answers. They just have a different outlook and a different way of trying to get the answer to that equation.
Now, when you were researching the book, did you talk to any, professional skeptics, amazing Randy type guys or gals who, you come in there and be like, okay, well, here's the opposite end of the spectrum. Did you encounter any of those or seek any out in working on the book?
I didn't because even though, in journalism, you should have balance when you're doing a news story, this book isn't really a news story. It's more just, like I said, it's kind of a call to arms for people to be interested in this stuff. So I didn't try to actively reach any skeptics, but I did interview, I have a quote from Rich Doty, who is known from, if you've ever seen the film Magic Men. He's featured on there. He was basically a CIA operative who is allegedly in charge of spreading a disinformation campaign. And he's he's a big name. And he's somebody I interviewed for the website. And used one of his quotes for the book. And one of the quotes I used from the book was him quoting a skeptic. And the quote he said was, I'm paraphrasing it right now because I don't have it in front of me. But it's the UFOs community. The UFO community's biggest enemy is itself, and that's so true because you have so much infighting in this community. You have almost like these little factions of what this group believes in this group believes in this, and so forth. Or you read so and so, that person sucks. You have no credibility. There's so much of that infighting. Which almost makes it kind of hard to want to be involved in that because I can understand why some of these people who are researching this for years get jaded. Because it's a very divisive community at times.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because when we were talking about religion before, that's no one hated each other more than like the Protestants versus the Catholics versus the two groups that ostensibly believe the same thing will kill each other over it. And I haven't seen any UFO people kill each other over anything yet. But I've certainly seen people get in very heated arguments about, the nuts and bolts theory versus the interdimensional theory. The people saying that it's an extraterrestrials coming down to Earth, visiting us, going on space vacations or whatever. They develop technology where they can travel the universe, versus people saying, no, it's got to be interdimensional beings who are slipping in and out because there's no physical way possible. I've seen people yell at each other about that. And at that point, we're just arguing about how many angels can dance at the head of a pin.
Yeah. It's true. Like one of the things I talk about in the book is the UFO community in general, about how there needs to be kind of it's good to have different opinions and contrasting ideas. That's fine, but just in general, I think the reason why it's so, I'm trying to think of the word, not discombobulated, but it's not focused. I think it's okay to have different beliefs in there. That's fine, but the end goal has to be the same. Not to necessarily run down what other people believe, but just try to find the answers. And it's okay to be skeptical and question everything. I get that, but it gets to the point where you're questioning everything to the point where you don't believe in anything or you don't trust anything to begin with. That's when it gets kind of muddy, where it's like, well, then what do you believe then?
So what do you think is what do you think the focus should be, or where should we be? As you've been researching and as you've been interviewing and blogging and now authoring a brand new book about true believers, where do you think we should be putting our focus? Or, at least where do you think obviously this is always evolving for everybody, but where would you like to see it go from here as how you feel today?
I think in terms of ufology or in general?
Start with ufology.
Yeah, the ufology, I think people just need to be patient. Everybody wants, the answers right then and now, and it's not going to happen. One of the things I have a whole chapter in the book about disclosure and how the idea to me of disclosure is silly because disclosure, even if it happens, people need to care. And I don't think enough people care right now. If disclosure happened, that would make that much of an impact. People need to care for disclosure to be relevant. And that's kind of a big argument I make in one of the chapters. In terms of in general, I think, like I said, it's these people wanting to know these answers to these things. So where do we go? I think we look at stuff that's previously there. We look at religion, we look at mythology, we look at these stories, and we tie them all together. There's commonalities between all of them. There's some truth to some of these fictions. I'm not saying everything that's been written is factually accurate, but there's some truth in there somewhere. Somewhere there's a truth, or somewhere there's an influence, or somewhere there's something that was built upon. And then we kind of look at it and go from there.
So keep digging.
Keep digging. That's exactly.
I love it. One final question for you, and I want to thank you again for taking your time to talk to us today, because it's always fun. I always enjoy reading your blog posts and your updates. It's something I look forward to. So it's a pleasure to get to speak to you, kind of in person. We're Skype person again, but I think you, coming from a professional journalism background, have a lot to offer a lot of investigators and bloggers and people who are writing up their experiences, because journalism has certain tenets that, when adhered to, at least seem to get us closer to some idea of the truth. And so, would you have any of your top 3 tips for people who are going out and doing investigations and are going to write it up later, coming from a professional journalist?
All right, great question. First of all, every case in this is different, because if you see a UFO, it's going to be hard to be able to you want to talk to the witness, right? Well, then who else do you want to talk to? You want to maybe talk to somebody in town who has a position of power, right? Or you want to try to get quotes from different sources. But say if you're just a friendly blogger, you may not have the time or resources. So sometimes eyewitness reports have to suffice. That being said, if you have more time or more resources, obviously, try to talk to as many people as possible. Tip 1. Tip 2, I think for people to be taken credibly, their stuff needs to be written well, professionally, copy edited. Look, we all make mistakes. That happens. Even the best people make mistakes. But I remember, when I was in college, I was taking a copy editing class, and my professor was like, if you spell a word wrong, how am I going to trust that everything else in your story is factually accurate if you can't even spell this word right? And that always stuck with me. So, 2, like I said, be professional. Write it just like you would, a professional paper. And then 3, I think is just, like you said earlier, keep digging, keep grinding, right? Who cares, what people are going to think in terms of, like say if you're working for the website of the newspaper in your town, and you're a web producer, and you have a story about UFOs, you want to pitch it for the website. You want to pitch it at a spot that's going to get a lot of clicks and a lot of people seeing it. Don't be afraid. I remember when I was at the Eastern Chronicle, I kind of talked about this in the first book too. We did, myself and one of the writers, we did a video Bigfoot debate, just because we thought it'd be kind of fun, but it was still kind of taken at kind of lighthearted, and in all reality, it should have been, we had a serious discussion, but the way it was packaged was kind of very kitschy. And the stuff is real. It's real to a lot of people, and it should be taken seriously. So fight for that. Fight for the authenticity of it.
Fantastic. Well, let's go out there and find some stuff, guys. And before we do that, you can pick it up today, and a copy of the new book, Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. Mike, where can they find the book if they want to pick it up right now? Thank you.
First of all, you go to punkrockandufos.com. There'll be links to buy the book. And it should be on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com as well, in print format and digitally as well, if you want to get on your Kindle.
Oh, fantastic! So you can start reading it within 30 seconds of finishing it. Well, actually, within 5 minutes, because listen to the song coming up based on our conversation today, and then go pick up a new copy of Punk Rock and UFOs. Thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. I'm a big fan of the show, so thank you.
Awesome.
So what's exciting is today is the first day you can pick up Mike Damante's new book.
Very exciting.
Yeah, Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. We're not the first podcast to have him. We were the first to do the interview, but Ryan Sprague, who also has been on the See You on the Other Side podcast, he interviewed him this weekend. So he beat us to the punch and already launched it.
We'll get you next time, Ryan.
Yes, we will. We will get the scoop. But we're just happy. So make sure you go to othersidepodcast.com/207 and you can find a link and pick up Mike's new book, Punk Rock UFOs, True Believers, today. Wendy, when we talk about punk rock, what springs to mind for you?
Punk rock. Oh my gosh. What springs to mind to me is all kinds of concerts that we played in the early 2000s.
Yes,
with punk bands. And loud and high energy, and people, getting excited and getting their, not rage, but, letting things
all
out.
Their emotions. A lot of catharsis at those punk shows.
Catharsis, good word for it. Yes. People, moshing and stage diving and just running around going crazy.
Yeah. What I think of is like do it yourself. I think.
Okay, sure.
I think
you're thinking more of like the attitude, the punk rock,
the
rock
punk
attitude.
And I also think about the kinship to the culture, in that punk seems to be embraced, but it embraces the outcasts.
Very much so. Yes.
And also there's kind of a cycle of creative destruction in it too. And you can see that when you talk to somebody who liked punk in the 90s and then like punk in the zero. I remember it just happened at the gym the other day. Like punk, like this girl who's like really into hardcore and punk. So some like 2000s punk rock comes on like the Spotify station we were listening to. And she's like, "Is this the emo station? What is this?" It was funny, and that's the thing is, and I think that this has been happening at least since 1978 when people, their mohawks graying, the blue slightly fading, and they're just like, "That's not punk rock. Punk's dead." It just seems to be that cycle of creative destruction of throwing off the generation beforehand. That's built in to the ethos of punk rock. That's a feature, not a bug. And there's a quote by Henry Rollins where he says, "Questioning anything and everything to me is punk rock." And that means whatever happened, like the dogma of what happened before is what you question. And so for this week's song, I was listening to the Bouncing Souls songs that inspired Mike Damante's title. And
Cool.
then thinking about Henry Rollins' quote about questioning everything. So with this track this week, we went for a late 90s style punk song. And here's our anthem for not just regurgitating accepted dogma. Make sure to think for yourself. Here's Sunspot with "God Bless the Heretics." I did my best to get along. I was so scared of being wrong. Well, my head needed a swift kick. Agnostics and skeptics, don't let the power pull your strings. You need to question everything. I don't need to be redeemed. We have the right to choose what we believe. And all you need is in yourself. Blow up the past and make it quick. God bless the heretics. We're so afraid to rock the boat. You might be wrong in the cut you throw. Would you dare be a polemicist, empiricist, a materialist? Don't let the power pull your strings. You need to question everything. I don't need to be redeemed. We have the right to choose what we believe. And all you need is in yourself. Blow up the past and make it quick. God bless the heretics. And I don't need to be redeemed. We have the right to choose what we believe. And all you need is in yourself. Blow up the past and make it quick. God bless the heretics.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
It's not over yet, Mike.
What? The fat lady is not yet sung?
That is correct. The episode is not over yet because we need very much to talk about something exciting and new.
But you have me on the edge of my toes. What is that?
We have a brand new Patreon Facebook group.
Hey, that sounds like
Yes.
fun. That means I can talk to people over Facebook that I actually like instead of just my racist uncle.
Oh, yeah. So if you're in Facebook and you're one of our Patreon community members, you should have already received an invite. But if not, let us know and we'll get you in there. And if you're not one of our Patreon community members, we still do have a Facebook page that we post a lot of interesting articles. We always put the newest podcast episode up there and link to the show notes there. And that is at facebook.com/othersidepodcast.
We also put our paranormal newsletter up there. We have the 5 most interesting articles we find every single week. But you can also get that if you sign up for our email list. But make sure you like us on Facebook, facebook.com/othersidepodcast, and then engage with us in some paranormal discussion. We have cool links and articles to all over the internet, and all the fun stuff we find is on our Facebook page. And so it's only growing. We're just, we're kind of just getting it rolling now. And so we want you guys to come and hang out with us on Facebook, and especially for our Patreon community members, we're looking forward to engaging with you in conversations and stuff like that in more than just the hangouts every month.
Yes, and thank you, Patreon members, for going that extra mile. If you would like to become one of our Patreon community members, how can they do that, Mike?
Well, you can go to othersidepodcast.com/donate, and you can see all of the cool levels, like Dr. Ned, who's at the level where we give him a shout out in every single episode.
Thanks, Dr. Ned.
Cheers to you, Dr. Ned, and we'll see you at a show soon. And everybody else, have an awesome week, and we'll see you on our Facebook page.
Thanks for listening.
I don't have the brain to be a physicist, so I'll be in a band.